Everything said on this podcast is entirely for entertainment purposes only. This is satirical and should not be considered clinical advice in any situation. Please use your own clinical judgment, using your own knowledge, expertise, and research. Consult with your local eye department if you are unsure, and always act in the best interest of the patient. Do not listen to the things that we say and take it seriously.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Glasses Half Full. Today I am being ganged up by two Scots, unfortunately. One of them we're quite used to, Osman, he's here all the time. But the other one has quite a lot of information about the college and the scheme for registration. And she's also had quite a few certificates under her belt completed. She's also recently completed her master's as well, haven't you, Rachel? Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I got a distinction. It was a big shock.
So Rachel is an assessor. She also works as a, what do you call it, clinical guidance?
I'm a clinical performance consultant for Specsavers.
Yeah. And she's also got a bunch of certification under her belt as well, like I mentioned. So today we're going to just go over the pre-regs, the scheme for registration, how it kind of works. So I think this part of the first episode will probably be quite beneficial for the pre-regs that are listening into it. Because obviously when it comes to pre-reg, you're kind of exposed to what other optoms have experienced, what advice they have, but we've never really heard of what an assessor actually physically looking for. So I think, well, I know an assessor that's willing to talk about it.
I know an assessor.
we'll get her to have a little chat about that. So let's start off with assessing pre-reg as a whole. Now I was only assessed by you in stage one. I'm guessing you stage two, and you also do OSCEs as well, don't you?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between these stages in terms of assessing an optometrist, a pre-reg?
So we think of stage one and stage two, we think about it formative. So stage one is formative. So we're kind of helping you form as an optometrist alongside your supervisor. The stage two is more summative, so there's less discussion. It's, you're telling me the knowledge, you know it or you don't, and it's, that's the achieve, non-achieve. And then within the OSCE, again, it's trying to overarch all of that information into kind of bite-sized chunks that are based with the GOC standards of practice and the competencies that they've kind of set for the college. So stage one should be quite relaxing for everybody because you've got plenty of time. It's been updated September/July last year in 2024, where we moved the framework from 3 to 4 frameworks, just because there was this feeling that you should be doing it in 3, and actually the percentages of people managing to pass stage 1 and 3 visits was very, very small. So that was accepted as, let's make it the norm for 4. And certainly it's still quite normal to be doing 4 or 5 visits. And again, those have altered since 2024 because we've now gone more to direct observation, which all the assessors are grateful of, because it was very difficult getting an idea of what was going on for people. And then by the 3rd visit, only at that point coming to see you and see how you were doing with your patient. So it's improved an awful lot in this last year. But within that time frame, so we usually expect stage 1 to last between 6 to 9 months. And within that, you have, obviously, you've got your framework to work through. It's a very, very challenging time for everybody. It's very challenging for the pre-regs because you're stuck in a job, having enjoyed the wonders of student life. And not only are you stuck in a job that's, quite full on and generally quite busy, you're also having to work after hours. So that might be on training courses or your revision or improving your knowledge, all while trying to, get up early and get yourself to work. Stage 2 tends to be more tricky for those who are unprepared. So if you've done well in stage one and you've been a good stage one trainee, which we'll talk about what makes a good stage one trainee, generally stage two you should be able to just fly through. It should just overarch all of the things that you've been doing up to that point. And then OSCE, again, that can be, there's lots of Chinese whispers about OSCE in stage one and stage two. So hopefully we'll get through all of that today so that people aren't going in quite so unprepared.
So with you as an assessor, is there something different that you're looking for, more specifically, I guess, with stage one and stage two? Or is it basically the same and it's just like you kind of expect to be a little bit more
No, it's not the same. I think for stage one, you're looking at somebody forming into an optometrist. So nobody expects at visit one for the, you know, the trainee to be just like ready to qualify. You know, that's not what's happening at all. We expect there to be nerves. We expect there to be a lack of knowledge. There's certainly going to be a lack of experience. So that's an expectation in stage one, which we allow for. And that's why the framework is well, the way it is, why the certain competencies come up at certain times. By stage two, really, at that point, you should be an independent practitioner, as in you should be able to deal with anything that comes through the door. And that's why we do a contact lens direct observation and fit with aftercare, why there's a full sight test that we watch of an unknown patient. And then the overarching, you know, it's all about, you know, how you would tackle any kind of patient episode that would come in. So yeah, the difference tends to be that we don't expect you to be amazing in stage one, but by the end, we expect you to be getting ready to be an independent, competent optometrist.
Okay, so with, obviously you mentioned with the stage one and stage two, what you're looking for is different.
Mm-hmm.
With your experience in assessing a wide range of optoms,
Mm-hmm.
have you picked up any kind of classes of optoms that you can kind of see, like, is there certain types of them that you see that are like more successful than others, and like what traits you can see that you can see, hang on, this optom's going to pass everything first time, and then you see others and like maybe
it's an interesting one. So sometimes at visit one, you get a trainee and you think, wow, this trainee is amazing. You know, they hit the floor running and they're absolutely fantastic. And then you get to further visits and they've perhaps not progressed as quickly for whatever reason, or they felt like that visit one was their benchmark and actually they did really well on that, so they carry on in the same vein rather than, you know, obviously it gets far more detailed. So that can be a bit of a shock as an assessor. I think actually for you, Eddie, did your visit 3, you said something about colour vision. I went, no, but you know everything. How do you not know this? That was a shock for me with you.
I was about to say, yeah, for me, you were just amazed by everything. Except
I was like, oh, you're doing, and then I was like, what? No, you know this. Surely you know this.
I need to go back over everything you've just been. Have you had me?
So so there are things like that, and then there are others, you know, that you go into stage one and it's visit one, sorry, and they're so shocked by what happens, it's just that they then pick the pace up. Obviously, some of it can be to do with how you're being supervised. So some supervisors are like, just get in and get on. Some are, you know, a lot more kind of almost like wrapping you up in cotton wool to start with. And again, it just depends how you develop with that. But generally speaking, the trainees that tend to do well from the get-go are those who are enthusiastic. They are able to take critique. And to be fair, that's not easy for anybody, whether you're newly qualified or not. But they're able to take critique, and they're aware that they don't know everything. The concern is often where we get, and it happens with anybody, you know, you get a bit of style over substance. So, you know, they're brilliant from a personality point of view, but the personality is perhaps covering over a lack of knowledge. And it's just trying to get out whether that's bravado or whether that's just personality. And it can be difficult in the first visit to figure out what's going on with that. But, you know, as part of the job role, you know, we get quite good at reading people, and that's why it is probably easier now that we're more direct observing, because we can actually go and see people in their real habitat and see how everything's going. But you very rarely get anybody, especially now that we've kind of come out the COVID period. There was, it's been very odd the last kind of 4 years, because we've had trainees coming out who've had minimal, patient contact, and then they were, thrown into pre-reg. Like your year, you had done everything normally, and then you were shoved in at the end, as
we kind of had like that direct observation, and to be honest, it gave you that kind of like hope that you just pass all the direct observations, so you didn't have to have another one in visit 4. Whereas now, because you kind of get multiple, you kind of like, okay, well, they're going to have to come in like the 5th visit maybe, but like, it was a bit more high stakes, I guess, for us regarding direct.
Absolutely. And also, you've not kind of met me. I mean, you'll have met me online, but then all of a sudden there I am in your practice. And whereas, prior to COVID, we were going in straight in from visit 1. So that kind of look of utter panic and dread we got in visit 1, but we didn't really get it after that. Whereas, for you guys, it was, hi, here I am, and you've got to show me all your direct observation, and you may already be in bad habits. So that's where, we're all assessors are delighted that we've kind of gone through that bit now. So yes, it's a little bit easier.
You mentioned a bit on the sort of issues that good personality can kind of mask or attempt to mask. Is there something to be said about having good bedside manner, though? Or is
for
that
sure.
resides with the OSCEs?
No, because if you think about your bedside manner, the amount of information that you can get from your patient, and therefore a good record, is absolutely key. So if you can communicate well, whether you're in an exam situation or in real life, you can almost get yourself out of a lot of bother with a good history and symptoms, and a good kind of well, I always joke about it when we do OSCE courses. I said, just try and be a human being. But if you can be a human being while you're an optometrist, you can find out an awful lot more about your patient. And then when you understand how they tick or what is going on with them, it makes your record keeping a lot better. And therefore, from an assessment point of view, if I can speak to somebody about their patient interactions, they've got a lovely record that's nice and full, but they can also discuss, this is why we have trainee-led case discussions, they can also discuss a little bit about what was going on within that encounter. As an assessor, that's amazing. But, as a patient, you do want somebody to be, caring as well as being professional. So yeah, the bedside manner, yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that can't really be taught. It's something you've got to either fake till you make it, or you've got to kind of develop it over time. Very few optometrists come in and, they've got that straight away. And assessors and supervisors see the same thing.
So just on a tangent, I think a good part of what you mentioned with the development of both bedside manner and just communication, and even just the knowledge, there's a lot of reflection that you kind of have to do in your pre-reg. And actually, it's actually a part of some of your competence where you have to have a reflective account as well. Now, I don't know if it was a reflective account still something before me as well, or was that something quite new?
That came out for you guys. Yeah. So
it
came out of COVID.
What I wanted to know is how much of it do you see like genuine pre-registers like reflecting in the reflective account, and how much of it do you read and you're like, well, this one's just waffling about everything?
There's a degree of waffle. I think the issue is it feels very, with reflection, it can feel a bit flouncy and a bit soft. And we have come out, with a Bachelor of Science, and that kind of soft skill is difficult. The reason it's there is because the GOC, that's part of CPD now. So now that you're qualified, you need to reflect on it. And I think that the difficulty with reflection is that you do get better at it as you get older, but it's having to verbalize it and put it down on paper about how you felt that went and how things develop the way they do. And obviously the older you get, the more you're able to reflect on, why are you like this with this type of patient? Why are you like, this with men over women? Or, and it's to do with your, how you've been educated, where you've lived. There's so many different variations of it. So then asking somebody, 21 or 22 who's already in a high stakes thing to then kind of have to do some form of reflection, it's really, really difficult. And I would certainly say, as an assessor to start with, it was difficult to look at and mark, because as you
It's
said,
horrific, wasn't it?
there was a bit of waffling, and there's a bit of, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing here. But I think when you break it down as to a reflection is that discussion that you might have with your housemate at the end of the day about that patient that you had, or saying, oh, it was the patient asked me this and I didn't know what to say and I felt terrible because I couldn't make the patient feel better about this. I don't want that to happen again. So the reflection is that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to be better at it. But I think when you see it as a document, it's very difficult to reflect in a word count, without either being waffly or without it not being waffly enough. It has to be a bit of a storytelling.
Have you seen it kind of manifest in how the optometrist how the pre-reg kind of like progresses? Like maybe at the start they weren't in a certain way, and then they have the reflective account on afterwards, like in a director where you see that actually they've built on that. Have you seen that happen?
I've certainly seen the opposite of that happen.
Oh.
So, so it's like, oh, I've never seen somebody with low vision before, and I wasn't very sure how Logmar worked. So, I'm going to go and revise Logmar. So I would say, oh, so tell me a bit about Logmar. Blank face. And I think, well, it's lovely that you've reflected on the fact that you did, but you need to, action plan out of it. So that
I know I'm not doing this right, but I'm not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, but I've not got time to deal with it.
They have the first part nailed. They've nailed the first part.
I know what I need to do, but I just haven't done it. But actually, for initially when we went through it, so probably after your year, maybe the year after you, I tended to find that if I asked about that patient episode, so for example, let's say it was somebody with poor vision, and where the visual outcome wasn't what the patient expected, or something like that. If I then spoke to the trainee about that verbally and we went through it, often as we discussed it, we actually went through all the elements of actually what would have been in the reflective account, and then I would just say, that's it, that's your reflective account. Just write down what we've been talking about. That will give you your reflective account. And I feel for a lot of people that did then make it easier, and then you could see how the reflection was working for them. But certainly the majority of people, it's a tool to kind of help you develop. And some people are good at it and some people aren't, but you need to find a way round of how you can do the reflective account while you're still being true to yourself. But it's a discussion, it's a thought of what has happened. A good way of getting around them is thinking, if I had been in this eye test with my mother and I was the observer, what would I want to have happened? Or if the optometrist didn't deal with that very well, what would I be wanting the optometrist to try to do later to be better at that next time? Those are the ways to get into it, but they are really difficult. And reflection, I didn't have to do that until I was in my 40s. So, you guys are having to do it in your 20s. So it's a difficult thing to get into, and it's hard it is hard to assess. So it's not crazy to think that it's hard to write as well.
So, I mean, for me, there was really nothing that kind of tripped up on. I think I did everything pretty smooth sailing.
Oh yeah, you were amazing. Although you did a fantastic insertion of a contact lens while wearing a glove. I mean, I remember being bowled over just like, I don't think I could do that. That was amazing.
Yeah, I know. I had a lot of practice with insertion removal, so I was like, yeah, this is kind of smooth sailing.
Oh, get this one in. Yes, yes.
But yeah, so mine was my pre-reg. You were very, very happy with how I dealt everything. I don't think I failed any competencies at all.
Oh no, you didn't fail anything at all.
No. Did everything within 3 visits. Yeah, 100%.
Sure.
Color vision was the easiest one.
I know.
I thought it was 2 visits.
That's right, you didn't. I didn't even need to go out and see him. No.
Obviously that's a joke. Just in case any pre-regs now like really
Yeah, nobody does it in two. It's not physically possible. There's no two. There is no two.
What are the common trip ups that you see within like the pre-regs, more specifically with like stage 1 and then also stage 2? Do you find it being more in like a skill of like communication or record keeping, or even is there a certain competency that you see a lot of pre-regs tend to fail?
Dispensing tends to be badly done, purely because often we see it as a means to an end. You need to do so many dispenses, and then actually from either a business point of view or a supervisor point of view or a shop floor point of view, you are better value in a test room. And so you've done, the dispensing to a minimum amount, and then often you're then in a room testing eyes for the rest of, your pre-reg. As a result, we get very good at forgetting how to dispense like a registrant, and we become like an optical advisor, which we need from a jargon point of view. We need to be able to speak to patients about lenses and how they will work for that patient and how they one will work or won't work for that patient. But we kind of go out of the habit of looking at what the framework says, where it'll talk about discuss lens form, discuss blank size, how does the frame and the lens match. There's even a bit in one of the competencies about being able to do a good fit of a pair of glasses. Now, at no point do we actually go through that in stage 1, but then that can come up in OSCE. So there can be an OSCE station where you have to fit somebody with a pair of glasses. Now, if you think you've not done that for like maybe 12 months because you've been locked in a test room, that's a really theoretically easy OSCE station that you can pass, and then but you've not done it. So that tends to be an issue all the way through. It's just that we don't get to the depth of knowledge in dispensing. So people don't like it. It's a lot of maths. They just think, I'll just fudge my way through it. There's nothing easy about fudging your way through it in OSCEs, because you're then stuck, which happens a lot. You're sat for 5 minutes realizing that actually this is a topic they should really know a lot more about. So dispensing, which is unit 4, it's not great. I think binocular vision is also everybody's like, oh, everybody gets a little bit panicky about BV, and an awful lot of it is just the worry overtaking the science behind it, and just we're very, very lazy at binocular vision because we've got these fantastic orthoptists available that we can refer into if we're not sure. But it's little things like, dispensing, it's not a little thing, it's a big one. BV, again, not a little thing, it's a big one. Possibly less for Scottish optometrists, but pediatrics, like kids, particularly wee kids, in Scotland, I'm sure as we'll say, what's the youngest child you've ever done an eye test on? Oh, they were 5 months, and they came in with their 2-year-old sister, and they had an eye test as well. You'll ask the same question of English optometrists, and they'll be like, oh, I had an 8-year-old once. And so, a lot of the units of competency around paediatrics, we used to in England get, because you would go into a hospital eye service department and do it. And then we got COVID, and then we couldn't go in, and you just weren't exposed to children of that age. And so again, if you don't have the practical understanding of it, doing the theoretical stuff can be very difficult. So yeah, pediatrics, dispensing, and BV tend to be the real
I think with dispensing specifically, you kind of have that there's that kind of optom mindset where it's like, oh well, when I qualify, I'm barely going to touch glasses again because I'm going to be in a test room. And with contact lenses, you're still in a lot of places, you're still going to use contact lenses, so it's less so like that. But with dispensing, there's that kind of disconnect that you have with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
In comparison to the old, like the BV and the pediatrics, like dispensing is probably the outlier, I think, that optometrists.
I think it's more what Rachel said about naturally you're going to spend. You spend your entire pre-reg year, you're still seeing contacts till the end.
Yeah.
But to get your dispensing numbers, how common is it to still be dispensing?
But yeah, I think it's also overlooked though, because it's also you're not gonna delve into dispensing when you're an optom anyway. The most that you're gonna do is maybe a collection once every 2 months, and then also frame fits on kids if you're in a
How would you advise a pre-reg approach this topic with their supervisor approach a topic with their director that, listen, I'm not dispensed anything apart from an under 16 check in quite a while.
Yeah, well, I think the point of dispensing is that how can you recommend a lens, whether it be, you know, a single vision, a high index, something that's coated, how can you recommend that to your patient at the end of your eye examination if you've not kept up with the knowledge? So it doesn't necessarily have to be the practical aspect, although it's really important, you know, being able to, you know, mark up a pair of varifocals, you know, being able to problem solve if a patient comes back with an issue, you know, that's all practically important. But if you don't understand the difference between, you know, a digressive and a progressive, and a patient comes in with one type of lens over another, or they come in for an eye test because they're having a problem with their glasses and they feel it's a prescription change, and you don't find a prescription change, but actually it's because the appliance they're using is, you know, inappropriate, then how are you able to give that patient the end point of their eye examination where you're sorting their problem out? And these type of things, again, you know, if this is going very historical, but, you know, back to when I did my degree in the 90s, they asked the whole degree class, you know, put your hands up if you wear glasses. And there was like 4 people in our degree class that didn't wear glasses, 2 of which parents were optometrists. That's why they were there. Now, when I ask in, you know, training, you know, anything training based, I'll say, who here wears glasses? Who's in contact lenses? You know, so there's less of that kind of, you know, you don't necessarily know the horror of, you know, being told you're -10 and go out and pick some glasses. So, you know, part of that is my own, oh my gosh, you know, it's so important to let these, you know, any patient know about lens information. And now that I'm presbyopic, you know, my understanding of lens form when it comes to digressives, you know, lovely boosted lenses, you know, let's have a nice single vision freeform lens, and a varifocal versus a bifocal, you know, as a result, because I've got an emotional link to these now, because I need those kind of things. And I do think the emotional part of it is, you know, if you don't care what the person gets glasses wise, then, you know, who else is going to care about it? Because
has your varifocal conversion gone up since you became presbyopic?
Yes. And I think possibly being older, it helps. There's nothing worse than being told by somebody 24 about, you know, oh, your arms aren't long enough, and it happens at your age. I mean, it's certainly the way I discussed presbyopia now is very, very different to how I would have discussed it before. But also there's a lot more options for lenses. You know, I'll, you know, talk historically about, you know, hard and soft designs of varifocals. That's not a thing anymore. You know, you've got even, and again, it depends who you work for. If you work in an independent, you might have every single manufacturer available. That's just like going into a car sales room and just being told, there you go, pick a car. There's hundreds of thousands of lens options. And then within that, there's, you know, variations of design, there's variations of refractive index. You know, if you don't know that, you know, how on earth is the patient going to know that? And again, it's when we finish off an eye examination as a qualified optometrist or as a pre-reg, you know, in some cases as a pre-reg, you might then dispense your own patient. So you need to have known about your lenses to do that. But if you're not dispensing that patient and then you're handing them over to another member of staff, now that might not be a dispensing optician, you know, how is the patient going to know that the person you're handing them over to has the knowledge to pick a lens? You've been with that patient for, you know, what, 25 minutes if you're a qualified optom, or up to an hour if you're a pre-reg. You should have found out enough information to be able to get a good lens recommendation, whether you're doing the dispensing or not. And I think that's why, you know, we look at dispensing and we kind of think, well, somebody else is going to deal with that. But actually, it's part of that recommendation, you know, is a part of your, you know, college advice. You know, if you look at any of the aspects of Unit 1, which is within Stage 1, is all to do with communication. A lot of it has to do with, you know, you're taking enough information from the patient to be able to give them a suitable recommendation. And again, we think of that as, oh, well, we can't do that because that's selling. I'm not selling them a pair of glasses. I'm telling them what works for them based on, you know, what we found during the eye examination. And I think that's why dispensing tends to be left behind, because we just see it as that somebody else will deal with that. But actually, whether you're dispensing them or not, the optometrist should be dealing with that.
I think the the expectation, I guess, the college and the GSU would have an optom is to have a DO standard of dispensing knowledge.
Sure.
So you should essentially know the ins and outs of the lenses at the very least that your store provides.
Yeah.
And to be honest, you can kind of see where, like, in practice when you're working, if you have like good knowledge of dispensing, you can see when other optometrists don't, because I've had multiple occasions where I've had like a patient come in for a retest because they can't get along with the varifocals. I see that they're like a 55-year-old got plano distance vision. They've got +175, and they're like, I can't read the computer with varifocals. And I've just had this facepalm moment, like, well, you don't need a varifocal, do you? You need occupational lenses.
You might need an occupational for that one. Yeah, exactly. And this is why, it's not a one size fits all thing anymore. However, whatever analogy you want to use, whether it's about cars or shoes or, different tools, I am not going to wear a high-heeled pair of shoes to go for a run in the park. I'm not going to wear, hiking boots to go to work and sit in a consulting room. The appliance that you're recommending needs to be correct for the patient's use. And exactly like you said, with that patient example, at no point is the prescription the problem. It's the appliance that's the problem. So if you don't know enough about dispensing and the possible causes of problems, you can't resolve the problem for the patient. So so dispensing, I think, is our often undervalued tool. It's so, and as you, in some practices, you may be the only registrant working there. So, saying, oh, well, I'll have a DO do that. Well, you might be the DO. So, you can't assume that there will always be a DO on site to help you. So you need to know that information yourself.
I know I am.
Let's get a little bit.
Ricky.
yeah.
Let's get a bit controversial, a bit spicy.
Oh.
Is there any sort of brand or store that you go into and okay, these optoms are really going to know the contact lenses inside out, or these optoms are really going to be lacking, or is it pretty even across the board?
It's pretty even, and I don't think, I certainly wouldn't say from a company point of view, it doesn't, and whether it's a multiple or an independent, you can go into some independents and the knowledge is amazing, and you can go into others where they don't necessarily have the resources to kind of get this information. Likewise, you can go into a multiple and they've got the same information as the other multiple of their company down the road, but it's how they use their information. So it's at no point do you go in somewhere and go, I'm expecting this to be terrible. Your supervisor could be an absolute flipping whiz at contact lenses, or you might have a supervisor who is a CLO for your contact lens bit. And so therefore, your contact lens knowledge as a pre-reg is going to be absolutely stellar. But likewise, you might have a supervisor who was a DO before. And so as a result, your dispensing knowledge. So you can't, you absolutely cannot go in. There's no expectations really. It's based on the trainee. And again, you'll go into the same practice, often you're in the same area, and you'll have one pre-reg who you just were like, well, they were an absolute breeze. And then the next one, and there is not as easy going. And the supervisor's not doing anything differently. The store isn't doing anything differently. It's how it all gels with the student and the trainee. So no, it's very rare that I go in somewhere and just go, this is going to be a disaster. Sometimes I have higher expectations because I know the supervisor quite well and I think they won't take any nonsense, but that's, no, it's...
Yeah, it's a bit more individual than that. Fair enough.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
Think, the use of additional supervisor becomes quite pivotal in that kind of instance, because with my pre-reg, obviously I was in a large store, and contact lens was supervised by a CLO. My dispensing was supervised by basically a DO, and then my optom was supervised by an optom. So what I basically had was, when I was dispensing, I had a dispensing optician that kind of led me through all of the dispensing stuff, and I actually had, in like quiet moments, I'd take one of my colleagues who was a newly qualified DO, and she'd basically just go over the deep dark rooted dispensing stuff. Like she'd go over lenticulars and types of bifocals and things like that.
Yeah.
And that really boosted my confidence. I don't know if you remember, my dispensing was really good.
This
I
guy,
can't remember
everything he
that,
does is
but
really
I
good,
wouldn't have
though.
been surprised because it's always been that way in that store where the DOs are kind of like in charge of the dispensing.
Yeah.
But when I did my pre-reg, which was ages ago, I mean, my supervisor had been a DO initially and then qualified as an optom. We had a CLO in the practice because the optom didn't do contact lenses, and other than a receptionist, everybody was a DO. At varying points of, I had a newly qualified, I had a guy who'd been qualified for ages, and a trainee DO. So from that point of view, the dispensing was always kind of really high up in my brain. But then I got the kind of really interesting RGP and kind of weird contact lens fits with the CLO. So again, that was just how my pre-reg fell.
Yeah, and I think the good thing with that is that you get like, because as an optom, like I'm supervising now, and when I see something weird and wonderful, I'm like, well, I'm just gonna give this to my pre-reg to deal with, and then I'll see how they get along with it. And I think you kind of get that with the DO and the contact and the CLO kind of experience as well, where the CLO is just like, okay, well, this is an RGP, I'm just going to give you to do it, and then I'll check how you've been doing, and then you kind of build on that knowledge. So I think that,
do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that really helps with like kind of manifesting the knowledge that you've learned at uni and placing it into practice.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about RGPs again, that's one that's not done particularly well. But if we think about kind of you guys and how long you've been qualified and what your supervisors, for example, would have had to achieve, the RGP aspect, they might have only done 3 fits, and then they're expected to then help you to then do your fit. So if you do have a CLO who will be doing more, then, from that point of view, you think, well, actually that CLO, that's their bread and butter, is contact lenses, RGPs, and the CLO as a supervisor is less concerned about you doing that kind of thing because that's normal for them. Whereas you might find that, your supervisor, I've only done 3, I don't really know much about them. And then the knowledge it can be tricky to kind of pass on. But that's why, you have courses and, there's plenty of online resources about things like that. But it can be helpful if you've got, you're taking knowledge elsewhere. And it doesn't necessarily mean that has to be a supervisor. If you have friends or colleagues that work in other practices that have a CLO, or find that information, go to training events where you may be able to speak to CLOs about things, because often they'll give you a wee nugget of amazing information that it just makes more sense for you. And again, I think if we go back to that kind of what makes a good pre-reg, I mean, that's one of those things that's trying to get access to knowledge that they might not be able to get in their own store or practice.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for new supervisors or supervisors that have been doing it for a while? Is there anything that you're like, okay, this is to better prepare you if you know that, okay, I'm expected to have a pre-reg on the way and I'm more than happy to do it, but I'm not sure how best to approach it, what resources I should use, or if I should just give them the reins and pop in and help them out when they need it. Do you have any advice for new supervisors?
Yeah, I think as a new supervisor, it can feel quite daunting because you feel like you need to know everything. But I think this is the thing to be aware of: is you're not expected to know everything. Nobody knows everything, but you need to be in a position where you can intervene as needed, and you need to feel safe with your pre-reg. So if that is that you spend, the first couple of months being very, very much on the case of your pre-reg and really in their face, and think, absolutely fine. But you do then have to be aware that you need to be able to step back, because the pre-reg does need to be able to be an independent practitioner by the time they're kind of going into stage 2, where they don't need as much help and advice. Certainly from a college perspective, there's plenty of online resources for supervisors, whether that's new supervisors or supervisors who've been doing it for a long time, to kind of build their knowledge back up. And even companies like, the AOP will offer support for new supervisors if you're an AOP member. Obviously the college will do, because it's, part of their requirements. And then within, your own company, there will be other supervisors who you can, work alongside and mentor. And again, there'll be online resources depending on the company you work for. So there's plenty of stuff out there. It's just the sheer panic when, you're letting your patient go with this person who's just come out of university. But it's really enjoyable as a supervisor, especially when you're able to have like good conversations with your pre-reg. And although the kind of start dates and everything have changed a little bit now, you know, we always would start our pre-regs in kind of late July, early August in the store that I was working in. And you would always find you'd come out from Christmas and into the new year, and these pre-regs would be these beautiful butterflies of, you know, independence. And it was just so lovely. You would kind of come back after Christmas and, you know, January blues. And then all of a sudden there was this amazing optometrist that had, you know, come out from your pre-reg over the Christmas holidays. And that's always an absolute delight. So it's just, if you do the hard work at the beginning, it pays dividends towards the end as a supervisor.
Have you, sorry, have you seen or do you see like a trend of traits in which makes like a bad supervisor, or maybe
not so much a bad supervisor.
adversely affects
No, I think possibly there are times where optometrists maybe don't want to be a supervisor, but you know, for whatever reason, they have to do it for, you know, maybe another staff member's left, or you know, they need that within the business for them to, you know, be a supervisor, and that can be difficult. I think that the worst thing that tends to be is just if you just can't find common ground, because you're having to work with this person for a very long time. You know, it's going to be at least a year. You know, the average pre-reg takes about 15 months. So, you know, you have to, that tends to be the only, you know, issue. If, you know, either the supervisor or the pre-reg cannot gel for whatever reason, or, you know, particularly problematic can be when you've got, you know, a big clash of personalities. That can be really, really tricky. But generally speaking, you know, you have to be a registrant to be a supervisor. You have to be qualified for a certain amount of time, and you're working within your own scope of competence. So it tends to be more if, you know, there's like a clash, that tends to be quite difficult, and you know, whether one or the other party just can't resolve that clash, that tends to be an issue. But I mean, my pre-reg supervisor was in his 50s, I was 21. You know, he wasn't the best optometrist in the world. He just basically let me get on with it. But as a result, I used to go to the eye hospital. I did my pre-reg in Hereford, so I made friends with the orthoptists and optometrists at the eye hospital in Hereford, and I found other people that could kind of support me throughout. So I was supervised, but I, you know, made the effort to get knowledge elsewhere.
Alongside that last point you just made, we have had a message sent in by one of the people that listen to us, and
whoa, what?
They were asking, do you not check the inbox?
I'm just surprised that someone listens to us.
It's just me. I'm just inboxing myself. What you should do if you're not getting the right support from your supervisor, staff in practice, and how to deal with that alongside revision. And also in the second part, advice if you're having to, because this optometrist, I hope now, had to move stores and move regs, and advice when you're transitioning, when you're in the middle of a pre-reg, moving into a new store.
Yeah, I mean, there could be lots of reasons why, you know, if we think about why we might move store, you know, it could be to do with you're not getting the experience because of the demographic of the patient. It could be that your supervisor has gone on maternity, has gone off sick, or has left, you know, the job. And a lot of what happens is that trainees, they don't realize quite how stressful the year is, and they think, oh, actually doing that 2-hour commute in the morning is going to be absolutely fine for a year, and then realize, you know, usually 3 to 4 months in, that actually it's not conducive to a good working environment. So I think the main thing to be aware of is when it comes to optometry, as we've kind of demonstrated here, everybody knows everybody, and you know, it's a very close-knit community. So please be pleasant, and you know, if you're wanting to take information from a previous store to a new one, you know, you have to maintain a good relationship. So I think, you know, if there is, you know, issues where, you know, the supervision isn't as expected, there are always safeguards in place. So that could be that you take it to your supervisor first. They should always be the first port of call if you're struggling with something, or if you feel like the level of supervision isn't as expected. You can obviously speak to your assessor, but you know, that often isn't the best way to go, because supervision is, you know, independent on the practice environment. So, you know, the first option should always be to speak to your supervisor. And then if you feel like you can't get where you need to go with that, then, you know, your store manager or practice owner, depending on where you're working. You should definitely go. The worst thing to do is to kind of run off and start complaining about it to somebody who has no control over what's going on and therefore can't support you. So you need to just make sure that you keep it in-house up to a point. And if you are having problems like the traveling, for example, is an issue, then you need to make that very clear very early on, because in a lot of cases, your store, they've invested time in you anyway. They'll want to do things to kind of help you. And if they can do, often, that can mean you don't have to change stores, for whatever reason it might be. They can change your working hours or give you longer days that you only have to go in for 4. There's always a workaround, but you can only work around it if everybody knows what's going on. So the worst thing to do is to not say anything.
So regarding being an assessor, clearly we have first-hand account from Mehdi that you're a fantastic assessor. What made you want to be an assessor? What's it like being an assessor? Is it what you expected? Or is this something that you've always wanted to do, or was it just the next logical step?
Yeah, I think so my history with college assessing. So when I first became a pre-reg supervisor, it was the old style where we did PQEs, which is the way I did my qualification. And then by the time I went into my second trainee, we were doing this kind of blended, where they were trialing this new scheme where assessors were coming in. And as it turned out, the person who came in to assess my pre-reg was a lady called Sarah Dawson. Now, interestingly, Sarah had been my examiner in my FIT, so further investigative techniques, PQE, and I just managed to recognize her. And she ended up being my college assessor with my pre-regis for years and years and years. And I think one of the times she came in to assess one of them, she said, "Oh, I can't believe you're still a pre-reg supervisor. How are you coping?" I was obviously looking very old and tired. But at that point, I'd had, quite a lot of pre-regis. And I got to a point where I had a baby, so I wasn't working full time, and the college were asking, there was a live job for assessors, so I'd applied, and they needed, certain things, i.e. you had to have been a college member, and you should have had, certain numbers of pre-regis. So when I applied for the job, I was doing it to kind of supplement the fact that I was working as an optometrist, but actually as a mum, I needed a little bit more flexibility with my time, and I thought that that would be quite a nice way to have more flexible working hours. So at that point, once you're an assessor, you start off being able to assess at stage 1. You kind of go out on your own, and you have your lead assessor or your kind of regional lead who will come and assess you to make sure that you're safe to carry on. And then once you've been doing that for a period of time, you can then kind of move forward to do stage 2 assessing. The OSCE examiner is a completely different job role. It's 2 totally different divisions within the scheme for registration. So you can be an assessor without being an examiner, and vice versa. So I worked for quite a while as an assessor. And then again, the good thing about doing that is you can then support like training courses and things. So that kind of opened up a bit more learning and development. So that's basically how it's worked for me. I've continued on doing that. And I feel like as an optometrist, being an assessor, it's been a really good way, if I reflect on it, it's been an amazing way to reflect on my own knowledge and to be able to bolster the knowledge that I have, to make sure that those optometrists coming through know where to find that knowledge, but also are able to kind of come out as a well-rounded optometrist, as just part of being an assessor. But I haven't pre-reg supervised for a while now, so I think the last one was just before COVID, and then and I paid my dues, and I stopped being a supervisor.
You mentioned that you went into the whole assessor role due to the flexibility. Are there assessors that kind of do it full time, and how flexible is it? Do you get like a set amount of pre-regs that you have to see, or do you say that you only want to see like 2 pre-regs? How does it?
Yeah, they usually So when I was starting, initially it was they wanted you to kind of commit to having 5, and you will see some, certainly throughout the years, there'll have been times where I've had 11, or times where I've had 5, and it just depends what you're doing outside of that. There are certainly some assessors that do a lot of supervision, or they work at a university and then supervision. They work at a university and then assess, around that, and so they might find that they do a lot more stage 2s because in the summer when they're not at university, they've got more, availability. But the way that the college approach it is that, they've changed the, how it works. Initially you are not an employee, you're kind of like, it was like a special kind of contract. But basically you're not an employee of the college, you invoice them for the time that you do. So the amount of time that you do for them is dependent on what you have available. There will be times, I'm sure, certainly when I was doing my master's, I just didn't have the time to have 12 pre-regs like I'd had the year before, so I dropped down to having fewer, and then there's the ability for me to go back up again depending what I'm doing work-wise. I'm sure there are some assessors that that's the majority of their work, but the college do prefer that we do work outside of that. I've always felt it was very important that I still remained patient facing, so at no point in my career would I just assess and not do anything else, because it's an ever-changing job and career, so you need to kind of make that awareness when you're assessing as well, because otherwise it can make it very difficult to be aware of what's happening in a primary care level.
I mean, I think we are getting familiar with the ever-changing aspect of optometry, especially the scheme of registration, because, well, they're changing it again. So,
yeah,
they've, from what I know, they're in the next few years. I think, is it the first years that are starting uni now that will be on the new scheme?
So there are some that are already 2 years in.
Okay, so in the next 2 years, we're going to start seeing CLIP being rolled out.
Yeah.
And that's essentially a pre-reg that's embedded into the uni course, which gives them the qualifying, the accreditation to practice, and also with a master's as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how, I mean, I know you said that obviously you're a bit limited given that there's not the training done.
I think, so the issue with CLIP at the moment, so bear in mind we're in February, the assessors will be, for some university, utilised as as a way of training and assessing how the CLIP students are doing. So the CLIP is going to be about a 44 weeks worth of kind of integration from university and into a business or an optometry practice or hospital, unlike at the moment where you just kind of spend this, as I said, the average pre-reg is about 15 months. So at the moment you would kind of commit that 15 months to a store or a practice, whereas with CLIP there'll be kind of points where you're in your practice and back at university, and there'll be times where you'll be more in practice and less at university. The reason that we don't talk about it in a huge amount of detail is that the college assessors we've not had our brief yet. A lot of that is because the different universities have to wait for GOC approval to then swap into that change of course. But the main gist of it is that there was talk about optometrists being at a level 7 where we need a master's. So there was that discussion about, was the Bachelor of Science that we were coming out with enough? Then in theory, no. So this is where the master's then comes into it, but it means that trainees will be coming into practice without a degree, so they'll be still within the remit of the university. And again, depending on the university they're at and the home nation that they're in, the CLIP will look different depending on where they are. So it's really difficult to kind of give you an overview of it when some of the universities will be doing it one way, some will be doing it others. Some are wanting the College of Optometrists to be a help or part of the assessment framework, whereas others will be doing it all internally. So since COVID, when it all came out about this, there have been, a lot of discussions about how it will look in different places, we're at the point where nobody really knows exactly. Well, the universities do, and the college will probably know now. And until that's all given out to the assessors, we don't necessarily know how much involvement we'll have, but certainly the college and the GOC and the universities are working with major stakeholders to ensure that there is the ability to train optometrists to make sure that we don't end up with none in a time. Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of GHF. We'll have Rachel again for one more episode to talk a little bit more about the additional certificates that we can do and the progression that you can have as an optometrist. So a little less pre-reg, a bit more optometry kind of related. So thank you very much for joining us, Rachel, and we'll see you guys in the next one.